A big important thing must be stated on this particular subject. And that is that God not only opens up the Word to us and leads us on in a deeper relationship with Him, but He always does it on the wings of a move of His Spirit, where He has a greater thing in mind than just what's happening to us. But my mind is not set on what I'm going to do to the world and how many people I'm going to reach and how much of the world is going to believe this thing. If I did that, then there wouldn't be a true love affair going on with the Christ that's being revealed in me. Because that love affair between He and I has got to be so solid, just between He and I, not dependent on anything else. If it is, then it's not really a true love affair. If my relationship with the Christ in me depends on you, then it's not entirely true. If it depends on my church, it isn't true. If it depends on my favorite preacher, it isn't true. That relationship with the Christ in you must be so true and so solid that you would love Him regardless. It's like a husband and wife that after they have become one in spirit, then they're both ready to say, if we lose everything we've got, if God takes us down to nothing, we're still one. That cannot affect our love. So it's not an outward thing, finally. It's an inner thing. What am I to do with the Christ within me? I have a lot of folks come to me and say, well, there's not thousands of people ganging up to learn this truth. Well, that doesn't have anything to do with what I'm doing. That did at one time. When I was a healer, if I didn't have a crowd, I wouldn't continue. I've shut down meetings because nobody'd come. But I wouldn't dare think of that now, because it isn't my service, it's His. And that's based on a love affair I have with Him, so it doesn't matter how many is there, what others think. It matters what I think of Him. You understand that? So ultimately and finally, every decision must be based on this love affair you have with Him. I don't come with you and tell you law that if you don't quit doing this, you'll go to hell. If you don't stop doing this, you'll never see Jesus. If you don't quit your drinking, your smoking, and your carousing, and all of this, you'll go to hell. It'd be foolish for me to say that when I'm telling you there's another in you, and if you become one with Him, everything else is swamped. And if you don't become one with Him, what good does it do to tell me to tell you to do something? So if the love affair isn't intact, I don't know what else to do with God's people. I'm not to do anything. I'm to keep on preaching and ministering that the ultimate of your life is to become one with Him. When you become one with Him, you don't ask these questions anymore. Can I do this and get by? Is this all right? Is it all right for me to believe like this? Because it isn't based on what you do. It's based on how much you love Him. Now that's hard to come to. But to me, that's what the Christ life is all about. That it isn't Jesus out here that I fall in love with, that everybody looks to and believes in and supports. It's this Christ that God has birthed in me, His Son, who has asked one thing, that I become one with Him. Now marriage and all love relationships are to teach us that. A couple who become one in union, in marriage, will be a couple who have occasionally, perhaps many times, gone through knockdown and drag-outs and has had a difficult time in their marriage. Because if you don't know the opposite, you can never know which is right. And so union is really based on the troubles and the trials that you have in a marriage. So that puts a couple together to where they're one. And then how to handle that is done in your next relationship. That's with your children. In that relationship, you begin to see that you love them regardless of what they do. Now that's something hardly anybody ever thought they'd do. You see, that's never reached the church yet. The average family where there's love ruling in that family will love that child regardless of what they do. Am I right? Sure you do. What did you learn by that? That's God working. That's God showing you the power of our union with Christ. That we become one with Him as we do as husband and wife, and then in all our other relationships, we handle them by love. Not by what they do or don't do. We handle them by love. There's more than one parent sitting in this room right now who would declare that loving their child in a time of trouble brought about the correction. Why? Because ultimately the child has to correct themselves. Now that's not to take away spanking from little ones. But some of you are older heads who know that you have to deal with them when you can't spank them. And so there's a more powerful discipline and chastening that comes by love. And Paul spoke of that most plainly when he said, whom God loveth, He chasteneth. You see, that's the deeper kind of love. Well, I started out talking about this fact that we are in a move of God's Spirit and He's tapping us. He's tapping some of you on the shoulder who never thought your life would be unsettled, upset, changed, that you could just go right along in the same course. And I can speak on that because that's what Robbie and I thought we could do. That we just had life all tied up in a neat little package. We had our own church. We had every ministry you could have in a church. Radio, youth home, Bible college, day school. There wasn't anything our little fingers got a hold of we didn't do for Jesus. We were just all fixed up. God said one day, out of this whole wide world of preachers, I want you to get rid of all of it. He didn't say, take some time out and go spread the message. He said, get rid of it. Get rid of buildings, get rid of responsibility, get rid of people. We had a couple of associate pastors. We let them divide up the crowd and go with them. We shut down the Bible college and sent the students to another school. We shut down the day school. People who bought some of our property took over the day school. We got rid of it. That's what the instruction was. Don't hang on to it. Don't have a tie to it. Now, he's not saying this to any of you. It's what he said to us. But my point is that he tapped us on the shoulder, so to speak, and said, do it. Now, you see, I would have thought everything we was doing was the absolute will of God unto death to sit there in that church and die. And I want you to see that because you're a special people. You're a special people that God's tapped on the shoulder, and most every one of you that I know were very reliable. Most of you were sane, honorable, well developed, and God by His grace tapped on you and said, I'd like to make some radical changes in your life because I'm doing something in the world and I need you. It's God knocking down a Saul of Tarsus on the road to Damascus and saying, I want you. It's God saying to a Jonah in a whale's belly, better you listen to me. So this is what He's done to every one of us. So we're not just another little group meeting here. We're not a cult. We're not some lodge. I wish the whole state of Oregon was here, that every preacher was here. But it's like when God called Jonah. He just tapped one fella on the shoulder and said, go preach a meeting over here. He had a lot of trouble with him, like he is every one of us. And some of you in a whale's belly right now. And the reason I say that is you don't know how to get out of the situation you're in. You see, when you get in a whale's belly, your big problem is you're still alive. How'd I get out of here? And I think that's what I'm trying to tell you. Only God gets people out of whale's bellies. And some of you are getting sick and tired, but remember, you're making whales sick and tired too. And when you make enough people around you sick and tired, when enough people get upset with you, it's not pleasant speech, but they'll vomit you up. Right where you're needed to be. Right on the shores of where you're to minister. So it's all working. Now I hear you talk. I've gotten to know several of you. And I know God has put together an unbelievable group here. And you know I don't take a lot of time to talk in Institute about this sort of thing, but you got to hear it because I know some of you are in real wrestling matches with your issues of life. Your CNS gang is really overwhelming you. That's circumstances and situations. They're really working on you. But what did Paul say about circumstances and situations? He called them tribulations. I give it a nicer term than that. He said glory in it. Glory in it. So he's doing something to you. You say, boy, I'm a nobody if there ever was one. So was I. You say, well, I've never done anything for God. Neither had Jonah. Neither had Paul, except tear up churches. So you see, he's moving in your life. And it would sure help the Christ in you if he had a mind to work through that saw and felt this very thing. That'd take away your frustration and your confusion and help you to come to rest. Let me tell you something. There is a rest for the people of God that beats anything we've ever been in. You can sit in a jailhouse and sing when you come to this knowledge. You can stare death right in the face and say, you know what, death, you don't matter. You can look at a diseased body and say, if this earthly tabernacle is dissolved, I got a brand new building. I'm talking to you about something that God has done within you that's not reliant on anything outside of you. But it's what made Paul say, Christ in you, the hope of glory. That's what will bless our families. That's what will help the raising of our children. And that'll create a new thriving body for Christ that sees and knows these things and is determined to perpetuate them, whatever the cost. That's what we're all about. That's what God's doing. So it isn't just another little class, and it's not just another little group meeting. If I thought that's all it was to it, I'd be defeated in this place. Outer man is defeated in this place. We have about 20 students here. We'd be defeated if that's all there was to it. That isn't. It is that God has tapped a very elect group of people by the heart and said, I've got something to do through you. You're to be a light to this world because the light is being revealed in you, and you're going to manifest and express that light. People are going to see and know the difference. I've said it so many times before, and I guess people think I'm just promoting, and I really don't intend to promote, because I'm not after an offering or anything other than to explain something. But most of you are like people who sat in the church at Wittenberg 469 years ago, when they had a pastor that had waited before God and got the strength to do what he had wanted to do for years. And he went out and nailed on his front door 95 theses against the Roman church. And you know what he did by that little act? He committed the number one function that sets you and I in this room here tonight. Because that was a God-ordained moment in our lives that brings us together here 469 years later. You see that and understand that? So our question is, are we going to follow the leading of the Lord? Are we going to see and hear and follow what it is God is saying and doing in this day and time? Now this helps to get me right back on our subject. Our subject is the wrapping up of this, our notes dealing with the dispensations. We've talked about the law, and that always makes a deep penetration into each of you when we get on the subject of the law and what the law has to say. The dispensation following the law is grace, and then the millennium, and we're not going to go into those right now. But I do want to wrap up some of the things we've talked about concerning the dispensation of the law. We started out saying that the dispensations were the revelation of God's nature and showing the necessary things in His nature to make Him justified to place another person in the creature. He waited 4,000 years before He ever revealed that to anybody. First by the prototype of placing Christ in Mary. And then on the day of Pentecost, He raised up that one and only body to be called Christ, when every single born-again, birthed creature would be placed in that one body and later on be called Christian. The Apostle Paul preached and taught this message finally by the revelation of Jesus Christ he speaks of in Galatians 1. We probably are being very liberal in giving that gospel 100 years. But at least by the next 150 years from the time Paul received the revelation of the Christ life, within 150 years, within 200 years from the birth of Jesus Christ, there wasn't a pure gospel left on earth. The Judaizers, the Nicolaitans, the Jezebelites, all had penetrated that young Christian church and had splintered it. And God allowed it. With the death, I think, of the last apostle of John, who was probably Polycarp, the last semblance of the Christ-like message was stilled. The voice of it was stilled. And from that time on, Romanism ruled. Ruled for the next several hundred years until Martin Luther put his thesis on the church door at about, what was it, 1718? That's the first time a gospel by faith had been preached openly to the church so that we can find continuity in the plan of God from the day of Polycarp to Martin Luther. Now, we all know that when Martin Luther made his great declaration, that it was very simple. Man is not justified by anything but his faith in God. God alone justifies us, not the church. That was his message. But from that simple beginning, every single great truth of God needed to be restored. Every great truth of God needed to be restored. God used Martin Luther to start it. He used John Calvin later. He used John Wesley later. He's used every one of the greats in the past over 400 years to bring about a part of the restoration of what God's plan was for the church. The question always comes to me, why, God? Why do you take so long to do your big thing? What is God's big thing? That's his big thing. Chosen before the foundation of the world in Christ. That's the big thing God's doing. That's the reason for the whole universe. He waited 4,000 years till the coming of Christ before he ever did anything about it in the beginning. And then in a very short period of time, from once he started revealing Christ in the believer, only a couple of hundred years went by before the whole thing was lost again. Notice, in all of church history, with the exception of a couple of hundred years of the impact of the early New Testament church, except for a couple of hundred years, the whole plan of God has been under the power of the law. So Martin Luther began his great thing. And now, for these past 700 or 470 years or so, from Martin Luther till today, the world has been without the message of Christ, generally, strategically, open to the whole church. Now, this doesn't mean that God in every age hasn't had men who saw these truths. But you Bible students know already how difficult it is to find these men. We can't find even 10 books written out of past history of book writing that carries the message of our union with Christ. Very difficult to find. But he's always had someone who saw. But never did he have what we feel we're seeing today. What we're seeing right now across this nation in little groups are an intent group of people who have been tapped by God to hear, to listen, and to become what is in the message of Christ. And now, once again, nearer the end than we've ever been before, nearer the coming of the Lord than we've ever been before, God has said, I'm going to release the message, and I want it to be made known. Now that's the flag that flies over us. That's the mission we're on. We sense that everything God's doing in this universe hinges on us making clear this message. So he couldn't go and didn't go to the great churches, the great theologians. He's never done that. That's never been his plan in history. Humble little priest named Martin Luther was who he went to at Wittenberg. A iconoclastic type fella. Didn't fit in, never had. But God could use him, and God did. And that's the way He's done each one of us. It may be a good while before you ever get that feeling because you're still wrestling, some of you. But there are others of you that know. You know what I'm saying is that this must be of God or I wouldn't be a part of it. So He's doing His big thing again. It is interesting to note that He used that couple 100-year period from Christ through Polycarp to establish that message in His Word. He's got it established in His Word. The enemy of God has always been Satan. Not a lying, cheating Satan, a religious Satan. That's his enemy. A religious Satan that wants to reinstitute the law over God's grace and God's Son. Because Jesus has put Satan down. Jesus has put Satan out, and the enmity with God is between the created son of Lucifer and the unbirthed, only begotten Son of God, eternally existing in God and with God. That's where the battle is. So there are two things I want to close this subject with. The first of these is that Satan will reinstitute the law at every point he can, because the most deceiving, deceitful method he can use to separate us from the Christ in us is by tying us legally to the Scriptures. See, that doesn't look bad. You can even get anointed by that. Holiness preachers can be greatly anointed. In fact, most of them won't preach unless they're anointed. But that's exactly what Satan wants, is the law, because that separates the believer from the Christ within him. For Christ in you will not fight against your will and your actions. If you're determined to do something on your own, He, as a loving husband, will wait for you to return in love to Him. He will not force you. The second important thing to close out this subject is that in all of this, God has proven that man cannot operate in this world properly as he is created to operate aside from Christ. If Christ is all in all, that's not empty words. If the life we now live is Christ, that can't be empty words. If there is none other but Christ, that can't be empty words. We all say that. We throw that out as terminology in all religions. But if that's what it is, it can't be empty words. And it's God saying man cannot do it himself, within himself. He must have Christ. And what we have wanted to show in this brief study of dispensations is that every way and means by which God sets up a plan and says for man to do it, man fails. Thank God He set up a sacrificial offering whereby man would come in and offer his own offering and find peace with God. But the offering of a sacrifice by any Jew or Israelite never changed his life. He was destined to do it again and then offer another offering. So there was never a change, because God didn't allow the change to come by anything that man did. And so what's really happened in our world is that God daily and every moment is proving to mankind that he cannot operate in this world aside from Christ. That the only answers there are for anybody on this earth come right out of this new creation gospel, by seeing and hearing from the Word, where men saw Christ as their life, their only life. Only when we go into that Word are we going to be able to see and hear what it is God is saying and doing. In the study of sociology, we have at least 7 different sections of life given to us under general terms. And I don't want to leave this subject, but what I don't spell this out as best I can, because there's not anything we get swept up in any quicker than a national crisis, a storm out here, or severe family problems, or severe church problems, or job problems. Nothing so overwhelms us. And all of these overwhelming circumstances and situations of life are powerful enough to separate us from the Christ that's in us. So I want to plant a seed in you tonight, that it is not the alleviation of your great problems in life that's going to bring you closer to God. The purpose of those problems is to show you that the answer is not in this problem being resolved, but the answer is you giving up to Christ. As I've said before, my favorite cliche is that God will answer all of our questions in just one way, and that's by showing us more of His Son. So I want to run through the major sociological sections of life for just a moment or so and point this out to you so that you'll never forget that the answer in these areas won't matter. First sociological area is human governments. Human governments. I think every few weeks God puts before us a challenge that says to us, there's no answer in human government. We got one in front of us right now. Our nation right now is under subjection to the Philippine Islands. If you've been following the story, you'll have the same feeling I have. It's hopeless. If we do something, we'll be wrong. If we don't do something, we're wrong. It's a hopeless situation. If we let the Philippine Islands do their own thing right now, she'll go communistic as sure as anything. We know that. If we move in and do something, we provoke Russia and the rest of the world, even our staunchest allies, to stand against us. It's an unsolvable problem. Who fixes us like that? The devil? No, he's not smart enough. It's our Father. The answer is not in resolving human governments. I don't like communism. I really wouldn't want to have to preach under them because I'm such a loudmouth, I'd be one of the first shot. But I'm not afraid of it, because there are billions of people on earth right now under communism who are finding God, seeing God, coming to know God under severest of trials. And so I see, my God's not a politician. Whether the gospel goes forth by Jews, by Gentiles, by Russians or Chinese, doesn't matter to Him. For the gospel of Jesus Christ is the power of God unto salvation, whether it's in China where they have no preachers or Russia where preachers are shot. Don't matter. The gospel goes forth. So man within himself cannot resolve any problems of human government. Does that mean we just passively sit by and do nothing? No. We have to do what the leading, where we are, calls for us to do. But once again, I'm at rest. Because whatever circumstance I'm in concerning human governments, I still will stand before God according to this book. Our Chinese brethren live according to this book just like we do. Being under communism doesn't change one thing in this book. They still have to honor God's Word. So human governments is an area that outside of Christ there's nothing that can be resolved or solved. What is our mission? Our mission is to bring the gospel to all men we possibly can by lifting up Christ. Second, the area of economics. That's an unsolvable area. That area will never be solved until the millennium, for one of the important aspects of the millennium is every man will earn money according to the amount of work he does. Well, you can see right now our world's really out of shape in that area. A ball player makes $1 million a year, and a scientist that might be saving lives by his developments, or a teacher, may not get enough money to live on to do their research. So economics will always be out of control. Good thing none of us are running around saying, well, I didn't earn this money I got, I'm going to turn it back to them. We always think that it's the blessing of the Lord on us when we make good money and the blessing of the devil when we don't. But the area of economics will never be resolved. What's the answer there? The answer is Christ. Colossians says all things were made by Him and for Him, and aside from Him there's nothing in existence. John says, chapter 1, that the worlds were made by Him, and aside from Him there's nothing in existence. So in the area of economics, we'll not have any answers by man. God doesn't allow answers by man economically. Now what we all would like to do is to get our bigger share of it. We'd like to so live by faith that God could make all us rich, but that means somebody else had to be poor for us to get rich. No, we say God owns it all. He does, and He can give it all away. But He really gives to His children what is necessary to meet their needs. That's really going to be our testimony. Because our need is all we can spend. That's really all you can spend in a lifetime, is what you have need of. So in the area of economics, aside from Christ, there are no answers. Third area is lawlessness. Lawlessness. We will never resolve the problems of lawlessness in this life. Why? You only conquer evil with righteousness. It is only when you're weak that you're strong. Well, that doesn't fit in this world, does it? It's only the strong that continue. That's the way we operate the church. When we studied the body ministry, we'll go through 1 Corinthians 12, where Paul says that the only ones in the church that ought to receive recognition are the less honorable. Well, I don't think any of you go to a church like that. That the more abundant attention ought to be given to the weak. Well, our bodies are sure different from that. We've got the best looking preachers, with some exceptions. We got the best looking song leaders. We don't put anybody up there that's scalawag. We don't have ushers walking up and down the aisle that's not commensurate with our level of decency and honor. We put our best foot forward. That's what reaches good people. So we got churches full of people that the Spirit never says needs any recognition or honor. Well, we won't go into that. Lawlessness. I'll tell you how our world is run. The needy people in this world who need the law will never get it, except against them. You know that already. We got 2 or 3 big stories they're making movies out of, coming out of Texas right now, of multimillionaires who killed somebody. They're making movies out of their lives because every one of them got off scot-free. There's one of them that's even on the tongue-talking circuit now. Because we like that sort of thing. But he had the money to do it. Lawlessness. I'll tell you how the universe is run. One of my favorite stories. Some time ago, the story was in an Eastern newspaper. It was in an editorial. And the editorial writer said that out in Montana a few days ago, there was a family that put up a tent and was camping. And in the middle of the night, a bear attacked those tents. And the father got up to protect his family and fought the bear. And the bear killed him. Made everybody in Montana so mad that they got their guns and went looking for that bear and shot and killed him. Because they're not going to have a bear running loose that wanted food and just happened to run into a human being and naturally did what comes to him, protect himself and kill the man. So they killed him. At the same time, there was a trial going on the East Coast where a man, an adult man, had assaulted 6-7-year-old girl, mutilated her, and killed her. And in the process of the trial, he was proven to be slightly insane and was let off. Some hospitalization, but no jail term. So the editorial writer said, now that's America for you. Said the man who killed the little girl was let go free, and odds are he'll kill again. And said instead we went and killed a bear that was only doing what come naturally, and if we had captured the bear and put him in a zoo, he'd have never hurt anybody again and been a blessing to all. But said in America, we killed the bear and let the murderer go free. I thought that's a good description of our world today. Lawlessness. Lawlessness. Gaddafi. I like Time magazine called him Daffy Duck. Gaddafi can rule the world in lawlessness. Just tell all the rest of us what to do and how to do it, and we can't touch him. So there are no answers to lawlessness in this world. So the next time you feel frustrated over your life, just remember there's no major area in life that anybody can control aside from Christ. That's why His gospel makes the difference. Look at the area of race. We've gone through a great struggle the last 40 years in America to try to get the race problem resolved. You're now beginning to hear that we're no better off than we were when we started in about 1951 on this race problem. Why? Because the race problem's not something man can solve. That's something that's deep down inside that God never intended would be solved by man. All the time we've been trying to solve the race problem in America. It flourishes and grows in other parts of the world. The radical racists now are not people just between different kinds of races, but inside of their own race it's radical. I'm told in places like Detroit, the blacks are set against other blacks. That one of the major murder problems in America right now are blacks killing blacks. Particularly blacks killing young men. You see, we're going to always have a race problem. I spent a long time ministering in Jamaica, the black country. I could see over there the race problem never be resolved, and they didn't have any trouble. They were raised as Britishers, where there was never any strife like we had between the North and the South here in America. But the race problem was there because it's not a solvable problem. Christians don't have that problem because they see no man after the flesh. Paul said on Mars Hill, God had made all men of one blood. So Christians don't have a race problem, but we live in a world that's highly racist. I had a blessed experience on this one time because I come from the South, Texas at least, sort of South. And we have a lot of black people there that are still in a racist attitude and spirit. And we've never had it. Ever since we've seen Christ as our life, we've made no distinction in anybody racially. And it was starting a school one term, and I happened to be the one that caught the phone, and the lady on the other end of the phone said, do you still have any openings for school? And I said, I think so. Oh, she said, I need to get one. I said, well, we're fast filling up. She said, I'll be right over. And she came over. She's a black woman. And the first thing she said when she sat down, she said, I've got to ask you right off, not waste a lot of time, because I've been to 3 or 4 other schools. She said, do you take black children in school? And I poised myself very adequately for my answer. And I looked at her and I said, no, ma'am, we don't take black children. She was very nice. She bowed her head. Oh, she said, I want to get my children in school so bad. She said, I was just hoping that you took black children in. I said, no, we don't take black children. But I tell you what, we take children in. Do you have children? Oh, yes. I said, we'll take in children. She cried. She got my message. She had been under prejudice so long that when she ran into someone who wouldn't recognize prejudice, it was a lesson to her. We'll never solve the race problem among men. It's only solved in Christ. Health. There's one of my favorite subjects. Health. There was a Donahoe show here a few weeks ago. I wish everybody could have seen it. It really stated the problem of health in our world, because he had a couple of medical doctors and a medical reporter on there, and they were medical doctors that belonged to the AMA, and they were men who could not get, they had cures. One a cure for cancer, another a cure for the common cold, and another a cure for multiple sclerosis. And they had proven facts that they had cured people in these areas, which medicine says there is no cure, we're still trying to find it. And nobody would listen to it. Couldn't get anybody to listen to these doctors. And so the problem was they couldn't get any information in the AMA journals, the medical journals. And so Donahue. We got a Donahoe in our group. This is Donahue. He held up a medical journal and he separated it, and out of the medical journal, 1/2 of the pages were advertisements from pharmaceutical companies. Aha, he said, here's the problem. You can't cure the common cold with a new remedy because that shuts down pharmaceutical companies and they support the medical journal. So it's a good old capitalistic American problem that the rest of us can be sick with drugs that are not helping us because the medical journals want to sell more medicine through the doctors and won't allow anything else in the medical journal. That was the point. Tremendous what's happening. We have the cure, perhaps for innumerable diseases. But you have to fight to find them. Because in this world, the health problem will never be resolved by men. Never be. I'm going to talk to you some about this tomorrow night. I'm going to deviate from the lesson just a little bit, so I don't want you to miss it. But the problem is at the point that you're going to have to take responsibility for yourself. Can't just depend on what somebody says anymore. You're going to have to know yourself what it is you want done to yourself. Because on that show, the medical reporter said that the people in Germany who have the cancer treatment have cured 16%. Now that's not a big number, but they've cured 16% of all terminally ill cancer patients. And he looked over at the medical doctors and he said, can you give me a statistic in America of how many terminally ill cancer patients we have cured? And both doctors held up zero. We do not cure any terminally ill cancer patients in America. Now they can cure some who are not terminally ill. But there's not hardly anybody in America that knows that there's a place in Germany that has a cure rate of 16% right now, and they're not going to let it be known. That was the point. Man can't run this world, you see, because God didn't intend that man run the world. How is this world best run and operated? If the world was made by Christ and for Christ, and God has put Christ in us, then the affinity that we have by His wisdom flowing out of us will be conjunctured to, a part of what's happening in this world. This world separated from Christ cannot operate. Look at our next category, religion. We need to go into detail there. It's very obvious man can't operate religion. I'll tell you a little story I heard on that one time. This old boy was kind of rich, and he went to a very upstanding, formal, old-line church in his town, and that church allowed him to drink and carouse and do anything he wanted to in business and come to church on Sunday morning and serve as an official. The church allowed that. And then one day this fella, dealt with by the Holy Spirit, heard the true gospel, repented of his sin, and was born again. And went back to that church to testify to them that I have given up my carousing, my drinking, my filthy life. I've been born again. And you know what that church did? They kicked him out. Man cannot run religion. Without Christ, you can't make religion work. That's what you're seeing. That's the first thing you're seeing. Before you see it as born-again believers in any of these other sociological sections, you're seeing it in religion. That man can't run religion. There's something wrong. There's something missing. The missing thing is that Christ is the life. And unless He's preached, unless He's lifted up, unless He's all, I don't mean part or some of it, unless He's all and in all, you're not completed human beings. You don't have fullness. Only by seeing Christ can we operate in this spiritual world. Last of all, the section of war. Christ said there'd be wars and rumors of wars to the very end. There's no way man's going to resolve war. We haven't been without a war in the United States since World War II. We've always got a skirmish going on somewhere, but always somewhere in the world there's a war going on. That's the way it'll be. Our life in Christ rises above every one of these areas where men have miserably failed. We may have a cure for cancer now, but man without Christ won't release it. There may be a politician somewhere who can resolve the problems in the Philippines or Iran or some other trouble spot, but he can never operate because the world is run by power and money. Only Christ can function in our lives and cause us to find any affinity in this world. To be separated from Him is to fall into the idealisms of those who cannot operate this world. Thus all men separate from Christ live and operate by law. The law, the inability of man to rule this world, is a schoolmaster to bring us to Christ. For there and only there do we find our peace and hope that there is in this life.